Welcome to Blue Collar Reformation. Today, another special episode on the subject of St. Patrick and how the Irish saved civilization.
Shocking, I know.
Yeah, it's a sort of a different kind of story because it reaches into the Roman Empire and then to the medieval period. And as we go through this, it's important to understand where the medieval period came from and how the Irish had a hand in the preservation of Christianity and the doctrines of the church, even though they didn't have many great theologians in all of their history. They have a great legacy of basically preserving the scribal copies of many of the classics as well as the biblical and theological books that we still have extant today due to their copying because of a man named St. Patrick, the 5th century missionary. He's credited with bringing Christianity to Ireland, of course, and myths and legends have grown around him, including that he drove the snakes out of Ireland and used a shamrock to explain the Trinity. I don't even know if those are actually true at all. Obviously, the snakes, this is probably like metaphorical, talking about the sinners or something like that. His bad Trinitarian analogies are best expounded, of course, by the classic episode of Lutheran satire entitled St. Patrick's Bad Trinitarian Analogies. It's fantastic and really is about as deep as you need to go to why you shouldn't use Trinitarian analogies.
Yeah.
But to understand Patrick, you have to understand 5th century Europe and Ireland. So Ireland obviously is an island nation, and the European continent is going through a lot of turmoil at this time. So that brings us to really the problem of the classical to the medieval move from one age to the next. History can be neatly divided into ages like AD and BC, or different terminology like the ancient world, the classical world, the medieval world, or middle ages, the modern age, or you could also say another way to divide it up would be early Christian or pre-Christian, early Christian, medieval Christian, Reformation Christian, and then modern Christian, which is just gross and terrible.
Yeah, so, I mean, started off okay.
Just fragmented and liberal and everything. So we need a new Reformation. But anyway, so the ancient world basically goes from creation to 500 BC. These are round numbers, right? Creation to 500 BC. Classical period, which is the classics, when the classics were written, 500 BC to 500 AD. And then the medieval period, 500 AD to 1500 AD. The Reformation period, 1500 to 1650. I marked that off with the death of Rene Descartes, basically 1650. And then the modern period is 1650 to present. So we're talking about the movement from the classical to the medieval period. And we all know the caricature of what the 1,000-year-long medieval period was like from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, right?
Yeah.
Plague caused the need to bring out your dead. Castles ruled by random Frenchmen in English territories, throwing cows over castle walls. Watery tarts lobbing scimitars at kings. Visions of God, knights and chivalry. Peasants covered with and harvesting filth, and the love of relics. Those are the stereotypes.
I mean, some of them varying degrees of accuracy.
yeah, but
I mean, especially the filth part. I mean,
just covered with filth. Well, they didn't have running water. Well,
yeah, it's like
the Romans did, but
I mean, it smelled crazy back then.
Covered in fleas, having famine and plague. So those are stereotypes from Monty Python, which are lampooning the silliness with which post-Enlightenment historians who hate the medieval period have eschewed it. So it's like Monty Python's making fun of Enlightenment historians making fun of the Middle Ages. So it's kind of really meta and difficult to understand exactly what's happening there. But it also plays well to evangelicals who make the mistake of thinking medieval people were backward know-nothings. Post-Enlightenment historians call the time period from 500 to 1500, for example, the Dark Ages.
Yeah, like the Netflix filters, all like anytime there's like a medieval show, it's always like desaturated and like gross looking.
Yeah. Season of the Witch is probably not exactly the best historical reenactment movie, right?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. So the Dark Ages that preceded the Enlightenment are always called dark because the Enlightenment is the light, right? So that's their bias. And this is what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery. Snobs thumb their noses at past ages because we must be more smarter now, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the hubris of the Enlightenment. And it says more about the Enlightenment than it does about the Middle Ages. But we do have to reckon with the reality of a question, which is medieval Europe was darker than the Roman era. So what happened? It was darker culturally, educationally, it was fraught with feudal fiefdoms. And so, how did the Middle Ages come to be? How did Rome become the Dark Ages? And it all begins with the sack of Rome and the end of civilization. So, when we're talking about civilization, I really mean like a society that has a one culture, one way of thinking, one kind of like rule over the entire area, and has borders, language, has constitution, has customs, all these different things that go along with it. Of course, religion and civilization, uh, with all of its art and all of its beauty and all of its good, had declined. The fall of Rome is the decline and eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the late 5th century, so the 400s. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium for some reason, which I actually don't even know why. Why is it called Byzantium?
I think it's because that was like a byword for Constantinople, so it became like known as like the Byzantine Empire. And then when Charlemagne gets crowned Holy Roman Emperor, then it's like, oh, we can't call them like the Romans anymore because the Pope, we got a new Roman Emperor now, so it's like it's Byzantium. It's like that weird Greek stuff. So
Okay.
like
Okay. So instead of chronological snobbery, this is Western Roman snobbery. And that
yeah,
continued for another 1,000 years after the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire fell. And so here's how the Western Roman Empire fell. So power struggles between royals, assassinations of emperors by the Praetorian Guard, and maybe by people who also wanted to be Caesar, and the rise of powerful military leaders weakened the centralization of the empire. Inflation, high taxes, and a decline in trade led to economic hardship and social unrest. Of course, they also had welfare and all kinds of different things too. This is kind of depressing, isn't it? The
yeah,
Roman the Roman army, once a symbol of Roman power, faced challenges in defending the vast borders of the empire, and the army became increasingly reliant on foreign mercenaries and had trouble with discipline and training. Traditional virtues of discipline and civic duty, which are like the Roman ethic, right?
right.
They declined and eroded, leading to a decline in civic participation, a focus on entertainment and uh, enjoying yourself rather than governance. And Augustine most helpfully pointed out that Rome was spiritually weak and morally decadent.
Yeah, I mean, you can also throw in like like the odd femboy emperor in there as well.
Well, yeah, and that's really Augustine's argument. Yeah, exactly. So the Roman body no longer had a soul, evidenced by what he called decadence. He would always call it decadence because it means like they're not just like morally weak; they're just about their bodies, enjoying experience, enjoying stimulation, which is very similar to today as well.
right.
So let that be a warning. So after the fall of Rome, some were claiming it was because Rome had left their older pantheon of gods, and this led Augustine to respond to that no, the old gods were better than the Lord. And so in the City of God, his classic book, The City of God, Augustine wrote that Rome fell because of their low moral character,
Right.
basically. Yeah, which I mean really has stood the test of time. Anybody who looks at the subject has realized that no, Augustine was spot on in his day. In I think 426 he wrote City of God.
Right.
And so men were weak, sheep were scared. Hide your kids, hide your wives, because here come the Visigoths. The
I thought
Goths.
we were talking about the Irish, not the Welsh.
These are the Goths. The Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, they all invaded and weakened the Roman Empire in succession. Alaric the Goth sacked Rome in 410, and the Western Empire completely collapsed in 476 AD. So here's some key dates. So it's kind of it's like a 70-year long process, but well, and even longer if you stretch it out to other events. But in 378 AD, the Battle of Adrianople happened, and the Roman army was defeated by the Visigoths. So it's like their weakness being shown. Then in 395, the death of Theodosius marked the last emperor over both parts, east and west, of the Roman Empire, which was split apart by Diocletian, if I remember correctly. And then in 406, the Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine River, marking the beginning of widespread barbarian invasions into the Western Empire. And in 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome. Alaric the Goth took the throne and, of course, established his government there. In 455 AD, the Vandals sacked Rome. And then in 476 AD, There was the deposition of Romulus Augustulus by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. I think that's how you pronounce it, Odoacer, marking the end of the Western Roman Empire.
Which I mean, by that point, I mean, you just gotta wonder. It's like, like Rome's getting sacked so much. Like, is there anything like left to steal at that point?
Right. Yeah. So that's it. I mean, it's 100 years, I guess, in 98 years of from the Battle of Adrianople to the final end, where there is no more Roman emperor. And yeah, everything's burned. The books are burned. History is destroyed. The only thing that really exists still is Christianity, even though they don't have many books. They still exist, and they're like the only functional thing in society. And
Right.
so Alaric the Goth actually became a Christian. So that's a big part of this.
Hmm.
He became a Christian like 2 years after he was the ruler of Rome. And Christianity did continue to spread, but it was being trounced down by the powers of this world for a time. And another thing compounding this is in 536 AD, there was the year the sky turned black due to volcanic eruptions. Without the sun, famine, plagues, and freezing cold came. The volcano blotted out the sun over the course of the whole earth. Low sunlight caused darkness and cold, and worst of all, the bacteria to grow. Now, this makes my skin crawl. So, fleas eat the bacteria, increasing the load of pathogens they carry. And because rats carrying fleas cohabit with people in their homes during cold months, the pathogens from the fleas kill the rats and then spread plague to people. So maybe that would be a reason to call this the Dark Ages because it's
Yeah.
literally dark and freezing. It's a little ice age, basically. So from Rome to Constantinople to Jerusalem to China to Japan to South America, darkness and plague were actually recorded by the civilizations there.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that when you have like this civilizational collapse, I mean, if you just look at it, I mean, it's just scary times. It's just like not a good time to
Yeah.
be alive. I mean, you've got like the mass migrations of people throughout, like like Europe and like the world. You've got the Huns running around.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, pretty much like this is apocalypse, and this is what people don't get when a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like I want society to collapse and my niche political ideology can arise from the ashes. It's like I don't think you understand like what civilizational collapse like entails. Like it's really bad.
Yeah, that's 1,000 years of rebuilding.
Yeah.
There's a population decline of immense proportions. You don't have work, you don't have a job. Agrarian society is gone. In this case, it's definitely gone because there's no sunlight. How do you
everyone's
grow
just
anything?
everyone's just getting raped and murdered.
Pretty
Like
much, pretty much.
it's
But
terrible.
yeah, it's yeah, and the books are burned. Education is gone. Literacy is gone, and the world is over. Civilization has collapsed. So back to the problem at hand: the move from the classical to the medieval periods in history. The answer will surprise you that the Irish saved civilization and brought in the medieval world. So Thomas Cahill has a fantastic book called How the Irish Saved Civilization, which is an ironic title.
Yeah.
From page one, you find out it's an ironic title. And he's a Brit,
Yeah.
right? And he's writing about the Irish. And he points out in on page 5, he says Clark, who began his book Civilization. I think that's the same guy who had that miniseries Civilization on PBS back in the 80s.
I wasn't alive, so
Oh
I can
well,
tell you.
yeah. It's a good series. But he began his book Civilization with a chapter called "The Skin of Our Teeth" on the precarious transition from classical to medieval. Is an exception in that he gives full weight to the Irish contribution. Many historians fail to mention it entirely, and few advert to the breathtaking drama of this cultural cliffhanger. This is probably because it is easier to describe stasis, classical then medieval, than movement, classical to medieval. Now, what he's pointing out here is the problem of transition. How did Rome become medieval Europe? How did Christianity persevere? There were several factors, and one is the Lord's promise that there would always be a church on earth. Two, the the Christians were useful in society because they were not decadent, foppish Roman aristocrats trying to be, you know, part of high society. Just try to be a delicate, feminine, late stage Roman noble and work for a Goth or a Viking. It's not going to happen. The Christians were useful and honest, and their faithful presence in society led to the conversion of Alaric the Goth and many other good things that happened. But the third factor is the Irish scribes preserved the records of Western culture. And it all began with an English bloke named Patrick.
Which, by the way, we're gonna like emphasize that Saint Patrick was English.
He was English, yeah. Patrick was born in Roman Britain to a Christian family, 401 AD. Uh, Britain had been Romanized in 43 AD after the Battle of Medway by Vespasian, who later became Caesar. And now Britain had been Christianized by this period when Patrick was born. Rome civilized Britain, and Christ redeemed them. The Irish, however, were still living in the Stone Age, and that's not like a way of saying it pejoratively. They actually were living in a Stone
Right.
Age style
They had not
society.
like discovered iron or bronze
Yeah,
yet.
right. And without God and without hope in their sins, kind of like Paul would say in Ephesians 2. So Thomas Cahill wrote, this is quoting him from page 1 of his book. I've read more of it, don't worry, but this is from page 1. It's really helpful. He says, the word Irish and the word civilization are rarely coupled together. and, and the Irish are wild, feckless, and charming, or morose, repressed, and corrupt, but not especially civilized. If we strain to think of Irish civilization, no image appears.
Yeah, does not compute.
End quote. Yeah. So if you go to look up Irish civilization in the dictionary, you'll just find a blank page.
Right.
It's like he doesn't pull any punches on them. So a British boy called Patrick was kidnapped by pirates at the age of 16, which is quite a way to grow up. So you're born in 401, you're kidnapped in 417, and Rome has fallen when you're 9 years old.
Right.
And then
yeah, I mean,
at 16 you're captured by pirates.
And just an aside here, I mean, this is kind of like the living embodiment of, I guess like, what's his name, like Bronze Age perverts, rape and pillage society. I mean, Ireland was living it.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, they weren't quite in the Bronze Age yet, so I guess it's like what the Stone Age mindset.
Stone Age mindset. Yeah. Yeah. That guy, I forget his name. What is his name? He goes by that. He goes by Bronze Age pervert. Right?
Yeah, but his real name's Konstantin Almaru.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like some Romanian
I'm
guy.
pretty sure he's some kind of psyop anyway. But don't look him up. Whatever you do, our poor viewers, don't look this guy up.
Yeah, do not listen to Caribbean Rhythms.
He is just useless. So he's taken to Ireland as a slave, where he worked as a shepherd for 6 years. During his captivity, Patrick developed a deep faith through prayer and contemplation. His captivity only led him to be more deeply devoted to Christ. After 6 years, he escaped on a ship and returned to Britain. After returning, he studied for the priesthood with the intention of bringing Christ to the Irish, which is quite a thing. That you're captured by these people. They treated him badly. They treated him. It's not like this is like people he fell in love with. He had to escape, and by the skin of his teeth, he had to escape. And he wanted to bring Christ back to them. So, being the only man who wanted to go to Ireland and preach the gospel, Patrick was ordained as apostle to the Irish and bishop of Ireland. So he's just instantly made bishop of an island, of a nation.
Yeah, very similar to Boniface with the with the Germans. It's like he goes to Rome, and the Pope's just like, "All right, you're Archbishop of Germany."
So that's the way to get promoted in the kingdom. Go somewhere where nobody else will go, where they might eat you.
Yeah, you're like, it's like Isaiah, send me, who will go?
Right. So he who is first shall be last, and last shall be first. And therefore, in 432, he returned to Ireland as apostle to the Irish and bishop of Ireland. Patrick preached among the Irish leaders and peasants alike, but he also had a strategy learned from his own life. He was a young Christian boy taken in slavery who became devoted to Christ, of course, under the duress and with much time to think. And Patrick saw a future in the education of the youth. He began a tradition of educating by scribal copying of important theological and classical literature. Reading and devotion to the Lord went hand in glove. So basically, his method of education was he'd set them in a house, and they all had the same book. They all copy the book.
Right.
So it was either the classics, or it would be Augustine, or it would be a New Testament or an Old Testament, and they were just copying these
And
documents.
guess what? That's like the start of civilization is like
Right.
reading.
Right. Exactly. So the next generation, the young boys, they're all trained. They lead their households. They're all Christians. They can read. They can write. They're useful in society, more useful than everybody else because they're educated. Good things happen from that. It's also a really cool strategy when you think about it to train the youth from their youth up how to think through the Lord's thoughts after Him. And so reading and writing and the ability to think through slowly through books that you have to copy is very useful. And Thomas Cahill, in his book, he goes over like all the interesting things about Irish poetry and things that really come from this ancient literature. They come from the classical world. They come from the Bible. It's really a pretty neat connection that he makes with the cleverness of the Irish personality and their kind of sing-song way of speaking kind of fits with like everything that has come into pop culture from the Irish with their um, their just their style of versing and everything. So he does a great job with that kind of stuff in his book, and I highly recommend that book. It's really
Yeah, the
interesting.
car bomb's notwithstanding.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he does say Ireland is basically a third world country to him. Yeah. he
I
doesn't
mean,
pull any he doesn't pull
I mean,
punches.
I agree, but
Yeah. So unintentionally, this led to the preservation of the classics, major theological works, the Bible. We actually have in the tradition of the West, in the Textus Receptus, including Irish documents were used to preserve the scriptures. So this is really important work that they did.
right,
Documents that were preserved through the time of always winter and never Christmas, the rest of Europe was experiencing under the looming shadow of Huns and Goths and Vikings and decadence and grotesque things that people were doing in Rome, and then also later on plague and darkness and the shadow of death. So at this time, the light was shining in Ireland, and Patrick died on March 17, 461 AD, which is my birthday as well. I was actually
yeah,
born on St. Patrick's Day,
that's a cool little thing.
not in 461 AD, but
Yeah, that would make this video quite impossible to
yeah,
make.
I would have to be like the Templar Knight that Indiana Jones finds in
Right?
the
Yeah,
cave.
it's like at that cup right there.
My strength has left me. So Patrick's legacy of saving the Western civilization is really the thing we got to think about. Ironically, the Irish are credited with this by Thomas Cahill, but really, if it weren't for the fact that the Lord had used those slave traders to capture Patrick, we would not have civilization with the same knowledge that we have now. Because what ends up happening is that those documents, after Rome falls and the cities burn and Rome is conquered and every other part of Europe is made into the haunt for various Viking hordes that are running through all the different areas, the Western tradition begins again as these things are published throughout the rest of Europe. So Thomas Cahill's point, he points out that a few historians have reckoned with the Irish contribution to Western civilization at this one shining moment. Almost nobody talks about it, in other words. He argued that historians tend to interpret history from their own perspective and ignore people like the Irish. Protestants today tend to do this. We only read people who are post Reformation. After the evangelical movement began in the 1960s, evangelicals only read or maybe click on today the contemporary hot new thing. They don't,
Right.
it's like the new thing instead of like, history began at 1776, history began at 1789 or whatever you want to put it.
Right. It's I mean, like we alluded to earlier, it's chronological snobbery, but also it's like kind of just forgetting like the roots. It's like, okay, like how was civilization preserved and like carried on? Like you know how was Christianity kept alive? Like by the tangible means that the Lord used, and I mean, he used Patrick to, like to this effect. Like in his zeal for missionary zeal for going to Ireland and allowed him to propagate these texts and like keep the train rolling until eventually the medieval period like develops a little bit more and we eventually we get the Reformation out of it.
You could never imagine the good that would come out of just, hey, I want to teach these kids to read. And hey, we'll get some copies of books out of
Yeah.
it. And all that happens down the course of history. So you may be saying to me, why Saint Patrick? He was a Catholic. Or maybe the Tradcaths may respond, the fathers are ours. Step off, man. Which we've gotten that response quite a bit.
Yeah.
But the older Protestants were more historically conversant, and we should be too. Like I was reading John Knox earlier today, and he was pervasively quoting Anselm, Ambrose, Augustine. You read the Puritans, they constantly quote the fathers, East and West. And then there's Calvin, who's probably the brightest light since the Cappadocian fathers and since Augustine, constantly quoting the fathers, showing their strength and weakness at every turn. And when I read the fathers, I hear the reformers and vice versa. And the only caveat is the reformed had the advantage of seeing the fruit in scholarship since the fathers, and so they are slightly more accurate.
Right, and that's just the general thing. Is like it shows that it's like, okay, it's the same faith.
Yes.
It's we have continuity with these people. These people, they had true. They had the true faith. They learned about the true faith. They expounded the true faith. They defended the true faith at these councils and all these arguments that they made. I mean, because a lot of that, a lot of what they put forth was against like heresies in the early church. So I mean,
which we agree with the response of the that are still held today by the Roman Catholics against the heresies of that early
right.
church, right?
So I mean, it's just the fact it's like, I mean, like you were saying, BBR, like we should be more historically conversant, and it's like these are our elder fathers in the faith, and we should be more receptive. I mean, just generally as Protestants to what they have to say, because that's our lineage, that's our heritage as well.
Right. Like I'll say to people when they ask, should I read this book? Should I read that book? I always tell them, read everything and read with discernment. Just read everything. But especially, we should be reading the church fathers, reading about them, learning about them. And so, Patrick, his bad Trinitarian analogies aside, Patrick is a shining light of bravery, sacrifice, wisdom, Augustinian theology, and mighty faith in the triune God in the face of great adversity. He should be remembered better than the day of drinking, vomiting, and sleeping in ditches by which he's remembered by the Irish today. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for watching Blue Collar Reformation. We are here to equip you with wisdom of the Word. The aim is to apply the system of doctrine taught in Scripture to every square inch of faith and life. We are on Twitter and Substack for your sake. Links are in the description. Share with your recalcitrant and reprobate friends and family freely. Blue Collar Reformation is a lightweight and mobile outreach platform. Take it in hand and enter the fray. Godspeed.